Hi guys, and welcome to Cultnomics. My name is Paul Hanley, and today I'm going to be chatting to you about the Keynesian cross model. So in this video we're going to examine what's called the Keynesian cross diagram. On the y-axis on the Keynesian cross we have CD, which measures consumption from disposable or net income. We have E representing all the expenditure in the economy. W represents over here on the right hand side leakages from the economy, and these would be comprised of savings, taxes and imports, all leakages from the economy or the circular flow. And we also have J, which represents injections, and injections are comprised of investment, government spending and exports. So that's the y-axis of this graph. On the x-axis we have gross domestic product, a measure of the output size of the economy, and in the center emanating from zero is a 45-degree line, and this represents Y in the economy, which is output or expenditure. And what we see in this graph here is that all along the 45-degree line, the level of GDP is exactly equal to the level of Y, or expenditure, in the economy. So it's like a mirror image of one another. GDP translated perfectly onto spending in the economy. Now, what we see is that we can map out spending in the economy using the following type of graph. So we have a line here, and what we are going to call this line is expenditure. And that expenditure line is a different slope to our 45-degree line, because not all money that's earned is spent in the economy. Where they intersect with one another is an equilibrium point on this graph here. And what it means is that at this point, the output level, which we measure by GDP down here, so we go GDP1, the output level is exactly equal to spending in the economy. So we have over here our expenditure level, so E1. Any deviations from this point, for example moving over to the right over here, will indicate that output is greater than expenditure, which would represent a recessionary gap. Over to the left here, what we see is that expenditure is greater than the 45-degree line, and what that indicates is an inflationary gap. Too much expenditure for too little output, so inflation normally ensues from here. What we have is our equilibrium point here, and we're just going to draw in one more line to this Keynesian cross as well, which is a consumption line, or a consumption function. So this line here is normally roughly the same slope as our expenditure line, and what we call it is CD, a consumption function. And what it tries to represent is, as income changes, how much additional is spent in terms of consumption in the economy. Okay, so we have our initial setup of our Keynesian cross diagram here, and we have our equilibrium point as indicated at point A. What we're going to show now is the impact of an increase in expenditure in the economy. So an increase in expenditure tends to do this on this graph. It tends to increase or shift upwards the expenditure line. So for some reason, expenditure in the economy increases, maybe due to government spending, for example, which is expansionary fiscal policy. And in this case, with expansionary fiscal policy, our expenditure line shifts upwards to this level here. So we have expenditure 1, and we now have expenditure 2. What the Keynesian cross diagram tends to show is that an increased spending level leads to an increase in output levels in the economy as well. So if the economy returns to equilibrium, GDP, which is the output, will increase in the economy, as well as the expenditure level. So we go to E2 up here. So expenditure is directly linked into an increase in output, the size of the economy. But what you might see here even visually is the increase in spending in this economy. Let's just say that expenditure is maybe 20 billion. So the increase in spending from the government in this case is actually multiplied up in terms of its impact in the economy. So the extra 20 billion that's been spent actually creates an output increase of a greater amount. And in our case here, what we are going to say is that we started off at, and we'll put it in here, at an expenditure level of 100 billion. And after the additional spending from fiscal policy, what we arrive up with in the size of our economy is 160. So the change is from 100 to 160 in terms of the actual size of our economy, which we can replicate down here, the size of our economy, based on just an increase of 20 billion in terms of expenditure. So what's happening here? Well, we can measure that first off, and we can say that the multiplier in our case here, the multiplier is the change in Y, the size of our economy, divided by the change in the expenditure level. And we're already after saying that that was 20. So the change in the size of our economy, it went from 100 up to 160. So that's a change of 60. And the change in the injection, the extra money put into the economy, is 20 billion. So what we know in our case here is that the multiplier is 60 over 20, which gives us a multiplier of 3. So every dollar or euro of government spending actually increases the size of the economy by 3 times that. So $1 equates to $3 in terms of extra output. Now, the driver of this in an economy, the driver of it is something called the marginal propensity to consume. And this is when your income increases by 1 unit, how much extra you spend. So for example, if your income increased by €100, if you spent an extra €80 out of it, well then that would mean that it's 0.8, so an MPC of 0.8 or 80%. You are spending 80% of your income. So the technical formula for this is, it's the change in consumption out of disposable income divided by the change in your income level. So when your income goes up, how much extra do you spend of that? If we draw a dashed line straight across here and straight up, the increase in GDP was 60, and this increase over here we're going to call 40. So that's the change in consumption. Now, to work out our formula, the change in consumption, which is 40, is divided by the change in income from 100 up to 160. So it's 40 over 60, which gives us a multiplier of 2/3. For every euro that income increases, 2/3 of it is spent. Now, we can relate this into the multiplier formula. So the multiplier formula in this case here is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. Okay, so what does this mean in our case here? What it means is that our multiplier formula, and I'll just bring it up here, our multiplier formula becomes 1 divided by 1 minus and 2/3 or 0.66. And in that case, our multiplier works out to be 3. So in our situation here, for every euro that's spent, the impact on the economy is 3 times that amount, which shows the effectiveness of fiscal policy to stimulate and to multiply up the size of the economy. I hope you call back to Cultnomics soon. Bye for now.